Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's press conference. Because of the epidemic, please keep your masks on and keep your distance. The Chief Executive will not make an opening remark. We'll go straight to question. Raise your hand, introduce yourself and the organization you represent before you ask questions. The gentleman at the front. Good morning. I'm from the Apple Daily. I'd like to ask, yesterday, in the evening, the government issued a press release saying that the central authorities did not instruct you to tackle certain problems. Han Zheng, the deputy premier, said previously that Hong Kong housing problems should be resolved. How come that you had to specifically issue a press release to clarify? In relation to the Hong Kong 12, 8 of them came back to Hong Kong, but only one was allowed to call the family. The others were not allowed to do so. Lawyers wanted to reach them to provide assistance. However, the police stopped them. How come that their fundamental rights have been taken away? In relation to vaccination, given the low inoculation rate, I don't know whether you share my view, would you provide more incentives to encourage, say for example, to provide convenience measures to allow Hong Kongers to travel outside, to encourage them to get inoculated? Yesterday, the office of the Chief Secretary issued a press release in the evening clarifying certain points in an interview. The press release was issued by the Chief Secretary for Administration's office. The reports made by the newspaper was not entirely accurate, especially in relation to our tax regime. Hong Kong is an international financial center. The newspaper itself is also a financial newspaper. Hong Kong is not a tax haven. Hong Kong has a low tax rate and a simple tax regime, of which we're very proud of. In relation to instruct, in English it is instructed by the Central People's Government. It has never happened. Under the one country, two systems, in relation to livelihood and economic issues, we are the party to handle them. That is a feature of the one country, two systems. We make use of our own system to tackle these issues. However, the leaders of the central authorities are very concerned about Hong Kong affairs, including the economy and people's livelihood. They would like us to do better in this regard. In the past 3 years and a half, I have participated in a number of meetings talking about supporting measures from the central authorities in relation to this. But it doesn't mean that they have given us any instructions. They express concern and they give us support. So there is a need to clarify these matters. In relation to those people who have served their sentence outside Hong Kong, upon their return to Hong Kong, they will have to face justice. They are fugitives. They have committed a crime here in Hong Kong and they fled to evade their responsibility. We have to do our job. Their rights during custody will be protected. It's not appropriate for me to comment on individual cases in relation to what happened. The police will act in accordance with the law. They will not deprive anyone of their rights. That includes the right of when you're a fugitive. Thirdly, about inoculation, we ask you to be objective. As at yesterday evening, close to 360,000 Hong Kong people have been inoculated. there are people who will start their second dose. I strongly appeal to the public that you need the second dose in order to get the protection afforded by the vaccines, whether it is Comirnaty or Sinovac. 360,000 people. That's about 6% of the population over the age of 16. That is about 6 million. That is not bad, but we can do better. We have everything in place. That's why I said Hong Kong is a blessed place. Everything is in place. We have many locations for the inoculation. We have very efficient procedures. We have very efficient flow of information in order to protect yourself and your family, and in order to help Hong Kong to get out of the epidemic and for early resumption of cross-boundary activities. You should all get inoculated. We need incentives to different degrees in order to trigger a change in behavior. But the biggest incentive is to protect yourself. With your immune system being boosted, it will reduce your chance of getting infected. And even if you are unfortunately infected, it will reduce the chance of a serious case. That is the biggest incentive. A non-permanent judge in the High Court said that, of course, they're getting on. Of course, they would like to protect themselves, but more importantly, they'd like to protect their family, their grandchildren. So I ask you all to support the vaccination program. Of course, if we can, via reciprocity, allow people who have received their second dose to do more. Of course, it's something that we will look into and we'll try to get that done. And when we have some concrete details, we will give you more information. Next question. The lady reporter in the middle. I'm from cable TV. I'd like to ask that the NPCSC will call a meeting between the 29th and the 30th. They will discuss certain items. When will the bill be introduced to LegCo? Would it be the day afterwards, that is the 31st of March? Are there certain exhibition items in M+ that have violated the national security law? Does it mean that Ai Weiwei's work, say for example those photos taken at the Tiananmen Square, will not, or Sik's work will not be exhibited? Does it mean that Hong Kong people will not be given the freedom to create? Justice Lord Reed said that if judges cannot act in accordance with their conscience, and if Hong Kong's independent judiciary is undermined, then he would leave. Does it mean that, those judges are still suitable to be judges? Are you unwell after the second dose? And can you give us more information about other things? You have asked at least 5 or 6 questions. I've lost track at the those questions at the end. I'm very glad to hear yesterday evening that the spokesperson of the National People's Congress Standing Committee announced that on Monday and Tuesday, that is the 29th and the 30th of March, would convene the 27th meeting. The Hong Kong item is on the agenda. That is they will deliberate on Annex 1, that is the election of the Chief Executive, and Annex 2, the formation and voting procedures of the LegCo of the Basic Law. I am pleased to hear that within March they are able to convene a special meeting following the decision made on the 11th of March. It allowed us to lose no time to make things happen. Next week, the NPCSC will deliberate on the agenda item in relation to Annexes 1 and 2 of the Basic Law. When we have the decision and the deliberation of the NPCSC, how long will it take for us to take up the next stage of work? You mentioned about the next day. I'm afraid that is not going to happen, but we will lose no time. We have already started working on local legislation that need to be amended. We're talking about over 20 principal as well as subsidiary legislation. We will try to do it as early as possible. We'll try to introduce the bill as soon as possible because, as I said previously, in the coming 12 months, there will be 3 important elections. First is the election committee, the LegCo, as well as the election of the chief executive. For the last one, there are deadlines to be made. Well, the term is 5 years and it will end on the 30th of June next year. According to the election of chief executive ordinance, if we are to have the next chief executive on the 1st of July next year, then at around the end of March, the election for the chief executive will have to take place. If we can get the amended Annexes 1 and 2 by the NPCSC, and if we can introduce the bill as soon as possible, then it will be better. Secondly, this is a piece of legislation. The function and the role of the government is to introduce the bill to the Legislative Council for their scrutiny. In relation to such an important matter, they need time to scrutinize the bill. I would not for 1 second think that because now in LegCo there is a majority member of pro-establishment members, then that it would be easy. What we need to do is to give them the most time to scrutinize the bill and for legislators to perform their constitutional duty as lawmakers. But there is a footnote in the scrutiny of a bill. It's not to be counted by the number of days, but the number of hours. How many hours and how much time will the Bills Committee be willing to devote to the scrutiny of the bill? Usually, for Bills Committee, there will be a meeting once every 2 weeks and talk about the meeting will be 2 or 3 hours to ask the administration questions. I believe that this time round, as the president of the LegCo said, that they would try to accommodate as much as possible. So there will be more frequent meetings. I've already indicated that if need be, other bills will be asked to give way to allow maximum time for the scrutiny of this bill.
As for the question relating to art and culture in Hong Kong, Hong Kong has a unique art and culture scene. And it is a reflection of the Chinese and Western cultures that exist in the 14th Five-Year Plan. The central government has included the status of art and culture in Hong Kong for the first time ever as part of the national plan, and they indicated support to Hong Kong in our development into a global art and culture hub, and we would certainly exercise our function to become an exchange hub for Chinese and Western culture at the same time, we play by the law in Hong Kong with the passage of the national security law last year. Any work related to art and culture that is in conflicts or even in breach of national security law provisions, we must deal with them in a very serious manner, and this has been my stance all along. The chairman of the West Kowloon Cultural District Authority is Mr. Henry Tang. He was the former chief secretary, and at that time he was the chairman of the WKCDA. He also facilitated the mass donations to M+. He is now a member of the CPPCC, so I have every confidence that he would handle the issue properly. As for the Court of the CFA, all along I have stressed that an independent judiciary is an important part of our judicial system. It carries legal significance as well as to our role as an international business and arbitration center, and all these come from our independent judiciary. In terms of the appointment of outstanding judicial officers, since the reunification, the right of final adjudication lies with Hong Kong, but before the reunification, that was not the case. So in terms of the appointment of judges from other common law jurisdictions could be appointed as non-permanent judges of the CFA. In the past 20 years or so, we have appointed some outstanding judges or even top judicial officers from other jurisdictions to serve at the CFA. So this has been our tradition. You talked about one of the non-permanent judges, Lord Reid, and what he said recently. I think what he said was very fair. There is a big if in what you quoted. He said if something happened, then he would act in a certain way, but that is an assumption. If Hong Kong doesn't have an independent judiciary, and if the courts are subject to interference from the executive, then as a prominent judge, he should make a stance. But this is certainly not the case right now. You might not be convinced, but another non-permanent judge, Lord Sumption, he's a retired UK judge. Recently, he published a very good article saying that non-permanent judges would serve Hong Kong people, and they would consider the interests of Hong Kong people, and the work of the CFA has never been subject to interference from the central government or executive. He also urged his fellow politicians not to bring politics into the courts or engage in boycotts. So both Lord Reid and Lord Sumption said, indicated that we have a robust judicial system in Hong Kong. As for the question of vaccination, personally, I did not experience any problems after the vaccination. I did not arrange for activities after the vaccination yesterday. but I never stopped working. I worked till late, and here I am again today. So hopefully we can resort to science when we consider the issue of vaccination. And with vaccination, hopefully we can create immunity, and that would require a majority of the public to receive 2 doses of a vaccine. That way, Hong Kong would be able to build immunity. Please observe the rules. Next question, the final question for the day. The lady on the front row.
Is the government seeking to start vaccination for those under 30 years old? And the second question is, how concerned are you that the 21-day quarantine in face of vaccinations will put Hong Kong behind other regional financial centers such as Singapore? Thank you.
Thank you for the 2 questions concerning the Hong Kong SAR government's work in tackling the COVID-19 pandemic. First of all, as I have said on several occasions, Hong Kong is actually very fortunate as far as vaccination is concerned. When many places all over the world are scrambling for vaccines, we have a pretty assured supply of vaccines for the people of Hong Kong. At the moment, we have authorized 2 vaccines for use. That is the Kershing as well as the BioNTech. And we have advance purchase agreement with a 3rd vaccine. And we have over 2.3 million doses, which are already in place in Hong Kong. Okay. So in order to make full use of the available vaccines and to enable Hong Kong people to be vaccinated as soon as possible, you will notice that we have been adjusting the eligibility of people who could come forward for a vaccine. We started off, like many places, with what we call the priority groups. That is the healthcare workers, the elderly, and so on. And then we expanded it to another set of priority groups, like foreign domestic helpers, and so on. And then at the 3rd stage, we open it up for anybody, regardless of their profession, to anybody age 30 and above. So all these eligible groups now already account for 5.5 million of the Hong Kong population out of a total of 6.5, because at the moment we are not applying the vaccine to under 16 based on the experts' advice and also what we are seeing in other places as well. So the only so-called omission, if I may put it that way, is those under 30 who do not belong to the priority groups, say about 1 million. I noticed that the Secretary for Civil Service, Patrick Nip, who has been put in charge of this vaccination program, has already hinted that we will closely monitor the situation. If there are more vaccines available, if another batch from Sinovac is coming or from BioNTech is coming, then the government will be willing to open up to everybody. In fact, opening up to everybody age 16 above makes the whole thing much simpler. So you just come in with your ID card and then and you make a booking and then you will be vaccinated. So I can say that we will continuously looking into this and try to open up when circumstances permit. Now, the 21-day quarantine that Hong Kong has imposed on arrivals from outside China is, I will confess, is very stringent. But at the same time, the fact is we continue to have positive cases confirmed beyond the 14th day while in quarantine. Maybe when they took a second test during quarantine on day 19, then there was a confirmed case. I think up to now there could be about 10 of such confirmed cases. Which gets our public health officials quite worried if these confirmed cases are allowed to go home after day 14. But then later on, they are discovered to be a positive case. Now, but I certainly am fully and acutely aware of the pressure that this has put on a lot of people, not only just business travelers, but a lot of people. To be isolated for 21 days is a huge load in terms of physical and psychological and other aspects. So I would say that I would personally look into this matter and see whether we could find mitigating factors to reduce or to bring back the 21-day to the norm of 14 days, which are adopted in many other places. But at the same time, we could sort of assure the public health officials that there are safeguards in place to ensure that if people leave the quarantine center or hotel earlier than 21 days, there are certain safeguards or medical surveillance in place to ensure that they will not bring infection into the community. I certainly realize that since the latter half of November is now almost 4 months, with all these very stringent measures, it does give us the relief in terms of the cases coming down very significantly. But we will need to also take into account the interests, the benefits, and the needs of other people. 多謝大家。
Thank you.